Hi, I am Zira, the AI voice of the Institute of Study Science and Technology. I am going to take you on a jet tour through the history of education from the earliest times. Please note that we are using the timelines as they are used in real life today. So no matter what your religious beliefs are, these are the present dates used. In other words, we are using the Bible as our basis from the birth of Christ, regarding BC and AD. The history spans approximately 6,000 years up until our present age, but our tour is only about half an hour. Please sit back and enjoy the discussion, which we think you will find interesting. We will cover educational problems and possible solutions and guidelines to questions. Many sections throughout are relevant to groups of students of all ages. Each of the audio blog discussions will cover individual items of interest to parents as well, but we will start where it all began. This is also our first discussion. When God created mankind, He instilled in us a high degree of intelligence, curiosity, and capacity for learning. He gave each of us a mind that can gather and store knowledge and pass it on to succeeding generations. Through time, humans have used this intelligence to observe, describe, discover, and build. People have used their minds to record vast amounts of knowledge. The dates used are according to Ussher, and are used only as a working basis, and are not regarded as accurate as the dates of this period are very incomplete. These dates are used merely to indicate the striving for knowledge and wisdom from the earliest ages. 4004 BC. Going back to the beginning of human existence, we have dealings with the concept of knowledge and wisdom. Genesis 3 verse 4. The serpent said to the woman, "For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Genesis 3 verse 6. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. With the rise of trade, government, and formal religion came the invention of writing, by about 3100 BC. 1055 to 1015 BC. The prophet Daniel prophesied the following, which is very relevant to our time. Daniel 12 verse 4. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. 1015 to 975 BC. King Solomon was reputed for having wisdom far beyond the understanding of our comprehension. Being the author of Proverbs and presumably also Ecclesiastes, he expresses praise to wisdom in the next paragraphs. Ecclesiastes 3 verses 13 and 14. Blessed is the man who finds wisdom, the man who gains understanding, for it is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. Proverbs 8 verse 10 and 11. Choose my instruction instead of silver, knowledge rather than choice gold, for wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with it. Proverbs 10 verse 14. Wise men store up knowledge, but the mouth of a fool invites ruin. Ecclesiastes 7 verse 12. Wisdom is a shelter, as money is a shelter, but the advantage of knowledge is this, that wisdom preserves the life of its possessor. 730 BC. The prophet Hosea expresses God's charges against Israel. Hosea 4 verse 6. So I will destroy your mother, my people are destroyed from lack of knowledge. As can be seen from the earliest biblical times, wisdom and knowledge was something that humans desired, and would go to any length in obtaining it. Of the ancient peoples of the Middle East, the Jews were the most insistent that all children, regardless of class, be educated. On an ancient Egyptian clay tablet discovered by archaeologists, a child had written, "Thou didst beat me and knowledge entered my head." The Jews established elementary schools where boys from about 6 to 13 years of age probably learned rudimentary mathematics and certainly learned reading and writing. So vital was the concept of instruction for the Jews that the synagogues existed at least as much for education as for worship. 410 BC resulted in the cultural conquest of Rome by Greece. Greek influence on Roman education had begun about a century before the conquest. Originally, most if not all of the Roman boys' education took place at home. If the father himself was educated, the boy would learn to read and would learn Roman law, history, and customs. Until about 390 BC, in Greece, there were no permanent schools and no formal courses for higher education. Socrates, for example, wandered around Athens, stopping here or there to hold discussions with the people about all sorts of things about the conduct of man's life. But gradually, as groups of students attached themselves to one teacher or another, permanent schools were established. It was in such schools that Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle taught. During the Middle Ages, the invading Germanic tribes that moved into the civilized world of the West, and all but destroyed ancient culture, provided virtually no formal education for their young. In the early Middle Ages, the elaborate Roman school system had disappeared. Mankind in 5th century Europe might well have reverted almost to the level of primitive education had it not been for the medieval Church, which preserved what little Western learning had survived the collapse of the Roman Empire. Most students were future or present members of the clergy, though a few lay students were trained to be clerks. Unlike the Greek and Roman schools, which sought to prepare men for this life, the church schools sought to prepare men for life beyond the grave through the contemplation of God during their life on earth. The schools taught students to read Latin so that they could copy and thereby preserve and perpetuate the writings of the Church Fathers. Students learned the rudiments of mathematics so that they could calculate the dates of religious festivals, and they practiced singing so that they could take part in church services. Medieval education can be understood better if one realizes that for thousands of years of childhood as it is known today did not exist. No psychological distinction was made between child and adult. The medieval school was not intended for children. Rather, it was a kind of vocational school for clerks and clergymen. The 12th and 13th centuries, toward the end of the Middle Ages, saw the rise of the universities. The university curriculum in about 1200 consisted of what was then called the 7 liberal arts. These were grouped into 2 divisions. The first was the preparatory trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and logic. The second, more advanced division was the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Medieval education had its problems. There were many dropouts. The influence of the church sometimes drugged rather than enlivened the mind, and scholars were often expected to accept the unreasoned and the unproved. Materials were few and poor. Many university libraries had fewer than 100 volumes. Because books were so scarce, lessons had to be dictated and then memorized. Nevertheless, medieval schooling ended the long era of barbarism, launched the careers of able men, and sharpened the minds and tongues of the thoughtful and ambitious students. The humanist ideal did not affect the lower classes, who remained as ignorant as they had been in the Middle Ages. Its impact was appreciable, however, on the secondary education that was provided for the upper classes. The Protestants emphasized the need for universal education in reading, writing, and religion. This innovation was to have far-reaching effects on education in the Western world. In the mid-19th century, there was yet another change in education. The secondary school curriculum that had been slowly expanding since the founding of the academies in the mid-18th century virtually exploded in the mid-19th century. At the end of the 19th century, the methods of presenting information had thus been streamlined. The curriculum had been enlarged and brought closer to the concerns of everyday life. Book learning had been supplemented somewhat by direct observation. And psychological flogging in the form of grades had perhaps diminished the amount of physical flogging. In one respect, however, the schools of the late 19th century were no different from those, say, of the Middle Ages, they were still based on what adults thought children were or should be, not what they were. Although the general state of education was retrogressive, there were some advanced educators and philosophers. Their ideas about learning pointed toward the educational revolution of the 20th century. One aspect of Locke's theory, the notion that the mind is made up of faculties, was interpreted to mean that the function of schooling was to train the various mental faculties. Latin and mathematics, for example, were thought to be especially good for strengthening reason and memory. This idea clung to educational practice well into the 20th century, long after faculty psychology had been proved invalid. 1999 AD. Humility, the mind, wisdom, and knowledge. These four words could be the most important in any student's vocabulary. Each word is special in its meaning, yet in combination the basis of a student's existence and progresses through college and life itself. Humility, humbleness or meekness. Meaning a humble condition. It does not mean to be weak, but to show a low estimate of one's importance. Mind, remembrance. To reconcile oneself to the fact as inevitable or direction of thought. The part of the human brain which guides us in our doings, right or wrong. Thinking is the goal of understanding. Wisdom, common sense. Being wise through experience, years of experience in life teaches us to become wise. Knowledge, knowing something. Familiarity gained by experience or learning. Wisdom is knowledge using your mind with humility. An excellent expression recently describes the human being in the best possible way: you are not what you think you are, but what you think you are. Just let this sink in and you will fully grasp the meaning. Knowledge, as described in the Collins-Cobild Essential English Dictionary, is summarized as follows: knowledge is information and understanding about a subject, which someone has in their mind, and wisdom is described as the ability to use your experience and knowledge to make sensible decisions or judgments. Throughout the ages of human existence, we have found teachers, someone who passes on information, and students, someone who is interested in gaining knowledge. Information and understanding are the two key elements needed to build knowledge, for knowledge is wisdom. For this process to be successful, proper guidance should be given by the teacher, and the student should be desirous in gaining the knowledge passed on to him. Maxim Vengerov stated the following: in my travels through the world of UNICEF, meeting and teaching children from East Harlem to Sarajevo, I learned that to help a child succeed as a learner, a trio of elements is required: a curriculum that guides learning, a child who can absorb the learning, and the teacher who inspires the child to accomplish. And in the case of learning, all three are not just important to the success of our children's performance, they are vital to the survival of our world. We need a new asceticism suited to the conditions of the modern world, a strenuous training of body and mind in the new life. The position of layman is inevitably more difficult since the external forms of life are determined by economic forces which take a small account of religious consideration. This also affects the student with the vast amount of material to be learned and the need to excel. And not only is this confined to the inner life, but that life itself is exposed to multiple distractions. It calls for a heroic effort like that which converted the Roman Empire. For faith throws new light on all things and makes known the full ideal to which our Creator has called each individual, and thus guides the mind towards fully human solutions. It is necessary then to keep a watchful eye on this our world, with its problems and values, its unrest and hopes, its defeats and triumphs. When we talk about all the problems that the human race is faced with, the individual who has faith as well as the spirit, are those who in the end will survive. These are spirit-driven persons, they have willing hearts, are skilled, and are generous with their skills in getting the task done. They are hard workers and give to the cause loyally. In short, this is a person who has the spirit. Now many will protest by the reference of the spirit. Every person has the spirit within himself. It may be the Spirit of God, or merely just the drive of accomplishment. If anyone's work which he has built on endures, he will receive a reward. Taken from the Bible, 1 Corinthians 3 verse 14. This sentence rings true, irrespective of your religious beliefs. What it is saying, is that by perseverance, you will accomplish your goal. 2000 AD. The new millennium. Trends in global higher education, tracking an academic revolution. An executive summary. In the early 21st century, higher education has become a competitive enterprise. In many countries, students must compete for scarce places in universities. In all countries, admission to the top institutions has become more difficult. Universities compete for status and ranking, and generally for funding from governmental or private sources. While competition has always been a force in the academe and can help produce excellence, it can also contribute to a decline in a sense of academic community, mission, and traditional values. The last decade has also seen a veritable explosion in the numbers of programs and institutions that are operating internationally. Qatar, Singapore, and the United Arab Emirates stand out as examples of countries that have boldly promoted internationalization as a matter of national policies. They have recruited prestigious foreign universities to establish local campuses, to expand access for the local student population and serve as higher education hubs for their regions. But for the world's poorest countries and most resource-deprived institutions, the opportunities to engage internationally can be extremely limited. Inequality among national higher education systems as well as within countries has increased in the past several decades. The academic world has always been characterized by centers and peripheries. The strongest universities, usually because of their research prowess and reputation for excellence, are seen as centers. African universities, for example, have found it extremely challenging and complex to find their footing on the global higher education stage. They barely register on world institutional rankings and league tables and produce a tiny percentage of the world's research output. Traditional publishers of books and journals have increasingly turned to the internet to distribute their publications. Examining the deeper implications of this trend reveals that it has exacerbated the division between haves and have-nots. In many developing countries, new technologies are often considered the key to increasing access to higher education. The Institute of Study Science and Technology Solution to Study Problems. Plastic 21 is a home study course developed for the 21st century senior student, combining various techniques enhancing memory, understanding, and speed, thus teaching the student how to study. Find the course on our website, https://thebeststudycourse.com. Students can download free ebooks and sessions on this site. We wish to acknowledge the extracts from Robert Giuseppe's The History of Education taken from Early Civilization. Without these extracts, this writing would not have been possible. Acknowledgement is also given to the UNESCO 2009 World Conference on Higher Education for extracts from a report prepared on the trends in global higher education, by Philip G. Altbach, Liz Reisberg, and Laura E. Rumbley. We hope you have found this talk on education interesting enough to follow our other discussions and educationals on YouTube.